Hello, my name is Manasvi Chargunla, and she Shreya Shaji. We are sophomores from North Creek and have developed a policy about a cause that we are incredibly passionate about. Wanting to better the healthcare situation of the minorities in the United States, we built a policy towards two of the NGN goals: healthcare access to all and eliminate gender inequality. Our goals with our new policy is to increase representation and involvement of minority communities in healthcare research and decrease disparities. And you, our judges, will be investors looking if our idea is worth seed money.
The inequalities surrounding various minority groups are obvious in our society, but officializing this policy will issue change. Regarding gender, women are underrepresented in clinical trials because of an earlier misconception that men and women are the same, but this has been proven to be incorrect. These two genders are different on the cellular level and react differently to drugs and other medical practices. With the underrepresentation of minorities in clinical trials, the effectiveness of medical solutions can potentially decrease for minorities, risking the lives of many. People of other communities, specifically the LGBTQ plus community, face discrimination in healthcare. Many doctors lack familiarity and exposure to transgender patients. The unwelcoming feeling that the people of these communities face is astonishing and must be changed. The root problem for this is minorities not being the target of outreach for participants.
Some current standards for our research include the following objectives. The Nuremberg laws, based on the research that was conducted by the Nazis, enforce the need for consent of subjects in research. The Declaration of the Helsinki ensures regulations about considerations about the research being conducted and whether the research is for the benefit of the subject being studied. Objectively is also necessary through a federal policy in Washington. These rules are important to uphold the ethical integrity of research, but so far there is no regulation about the diversity of subjects in studies. This leaves research studies exposed to a selection bias and contributing to disparities.
Events in the past have fueled the distrust that people of color currently have about the clinical trials. The Tuskegee Trials was a study that was done on Black men with syphilis, but these men were unaware of the true reason they were being studied. These men were not given satisfactory treatment for their disease, even though penicillin was proven to be a drug of choice for syphilis. Underrepresentation of race is not the only thing clear in these kinds of trials. Gender inequality is clear once again in healthcare. The well-known company Amazon has shown bias towards men because of their AI and computer programs due to selection bias in the data. One specific program was made to review resumes of job applicants to find the top 5. By 2015, the company found that the computer program had a bias towards men because of the male dominance in the tech industry. So the system assumed that male candidates were preferable. Many doctors also lack familiarity and exposure to transgender patients. Often members of the LGBTQ plus community face discrimination from various forms of healthcare. Because of this, transgender individuals often avoid the healthcare system. In a study, it was found that 21% of transgender individuals reported avoiding the emergency department when they needed it due to their identity.
A recent issue surrounds the COVID-19 vaccine distribution. Though there are many factors to consider, the vaccine results show that people of Black or Asian descent show a slightly increased risk of vaccine ineffectiveness. Along with this, the distribution patterns show that Black and Hispanic people receive smaller shares of vaccinations compared to their percentages of cases and deaths. This can be because of the fear of clinical trials for people of color, but also because they are unaware that these clinical trials even exist. Up until recent years, paper advertising was a large part of marketing for clinical trials, but now all advertising is done electronically, resulting in some communities uninformed of these events. Bringing equity and acceptance to today's society is of utmost importance, and this policy is one stepping stone to that goal. Currently, there is no standard for diversity in clinical trials, and this calls for immediate action.
We based our policy on the percentage of our national population that are the ethnicities and gender percentages. We believe that the best way to tailor our data's accuracy to our population is to represent smaller versions of our population inside the data. Our percentages are goals for clinical trials to reach, and it is our goal to build up to these representations. Our policy goes as follows. Within a designated region for a clinical trial that is not targeted to a specific sex, gender, or majority/minority group to be considered valid to be able to evaluate the safety or accuracy of the hypothesis being researched, the diversity of the data set must be within criteria such as 40% or higher of the data must be women to accurately represent the 50.52% of the American population that is women. The ethnicities below must be represented to the following extent. 10% or higher must be Black, 1% or higher must be American Indian or American Native, Alaska Native. 4% or higher must be Asian. 0.1% or higher must be Native Hawaiian and other Pacific Islander alone. 17% or higher must be Hispanic or Latino. And 10% of the participants must identify themselves as members of the LGBTQ plus community, and 5% must identify themselves as transgendered to promote increased comfortability of this community in hospitals.
Selection bias occurs when the data is skewed to not represent to all ethnicities as the target population for the research being tested. Our policy will encourage and mandate that research institutes invest in the increased diversity of their data, making it a priority to eliminate selection bias. Ensuring that all minorities in the United States have increased access to the benefits of participating in clinical research and reducing selection bias that has negatively impacted the minorities. This creates more equity within the healthcare system. Another significant impact of our policy is its ability to increase acceptance that has previously not been as prevalent or as focused on. With the stigma and discomfort of minorities and people of the LGBTQ plus and trans communities, the policy will encourage the medical research community to actively reach out to these communities, beginning the process of building trust. We must understand that because of America's history of discrimination against these groups, but specifically in clinical research, efforts must be made to make these medical research communities more welcome to all.
For our campaign of this policy and to put this policy into effect, we are asking you, investors, for a bid of $600 initially. We would like to use 75% of the investments to increase costs of the policy. This includes local advertising, such as hanging up flyers in local coffee shops and introducing our ideas into meetings with town legislation to make it official. We would also like to use this money to begin fundraising efforts for the implementation of the policy. We understand that clinical research institutes are well-oiled machines, and implementing this new mandate on their data selection protocols is not as simple as purely asking them to do so. We would like to fundraise money to develop grants to clinical research institutes, which they can use for their diversity outreach efforts and can help them reach this policy. The 25% of the initial investment will go to the development of the beginnings of a grant for a clinical research facility to begin to beta test our policy implementation. We would use this money to help and begin an increased diversity effort inside the research process.
Our financial goals increase in the radius of implementation of this policy, as we hope to gradually roll out diversity programs catering to the policy in a multitude of clinical research institutes. In 6 months from now, our goal is to conduct one successful study under the guidelines of the policy. This means that one study will be underway or complete, in which the data of the study fits under the quotas listed in our policy decently well. In 1 year, we would like to use the profits that we have fundraised to be able to successfully implement long-term data selection changes to one local research institute. This would mean that we have worked with this institute to create a process that will be applied to all future research studies that fit under the quantitative requirements of our policy, and all future research studies will have this data diversity. In 5 years, our fundraising should be profitable enough to implement this program we have developed outreach in several research institutes in Greater Seattle, Washington. At this time, we would begin to look at out-of-state implementation.
Our current target market is to minority groups, people of color, and also people who want to advocate for a change in healthcare. Advancing to the future, our target demographic would mainly be minority groups and people of color. With a portion of the initial investment, we would want to advertise our new policy to different people of color and other minority groups in order to bring awareness to the problem at hand. This way, the need of our policy will be clear to target demographics. We have created a sample brochure, flyers, and an informative article with a breakdown of our policy and why it is necessary. We chose paper advertising techniques in order for our policy to reach all communities. This is the current target market advertising plan, but in the future, we would want to focus more on advertising directly to minority groups about how to sign up for these programs. A majority of these people in these groups are not aware of these trials because of a greater part of advertising has been taken online. In the sample flyer, there's information and instructions on how to sign up for a local clinical trial.
We recommend that you, investors, choose to put your money in our policy. To uphold the promise, the Hippocratic Oath ensures to treat the sick to the best of their ability. There's a necessity to mandate an increase in the diversity of study data to make sure selection bias does not interfere with the effectiveness of a research development on a minority in our country. Increasing the access minorities have in the clinical research study will reduce disparities in care that the disproportional impact health. Our policy actively ensures that researchers are investing in decrease the part studies have in disparities. Additionally, our policy solves problems rooted in our past that led to minorities such as LGBTQ and trans communities feeling unwelcome from the medical community. As more outreach is done between the medical research community and minorities, there will be a collaborative and welcoming spirit that is natured.
Our diversity in clinical trials solves problems of selection bias, disparities, and distrust in clinical trials. It is a necessary policy to help institutions create their diversity and equity within their studies. We hope you will choose to invest in our policy. Thank you for your time, and we are now open to any questions.
Thank you for the presentation. Let me ask the first question. How do you get the policy equality when the problem itself is not equal? For example, it is possible that certain group of people are more exposed to a certain medical problem, and therefore the clinical trial is not even applicable to the rest of the audience. So how do you make sure that the policy is not hitting back on why this could not be effective?
We tailored our policy to mainly be designed around problems that are being tested on the general population. So we specified that we did not want to impact the data selection of studies that were targeted towards testing a specific disease or a research development on a certain ethnicity or gender. So it's mainly applicable when the test subject is just the population or a general sample in general.
Thanks.
So I have a question about cost implications of a policy like this. So in both medical device and pharmaceutical, patient subject recruitment can be a challenge in getting people to sign up. So when it comes to what would be your metric, like if a typical 3 phases of single shot pharmaceutical trial, something on the order of $100 million, is there an upper limit of cost impact to the trial that you would set, or would that be unlimited? Because I can imagine scenarios where it'd be really hard to fill in your last Pacific Islanders or whatever it is that you're missing, so the recruitment would presumably be more challenging.
I don't think that we would specifically have an upper limit, just because we are trying to fundraise money within the community itself to have these diversity mandates on the research study. So our goal is to not interrupt the process or the cost of the research institute, but just try and increase the diversity using our policy within that research institute without interrupting anything going on already.
Okay, thanks.
Yes, well, great presentation. I don't have a specific question to ask. Everything seems pretty clear, and congrats on what you're doing. Hope everything works out pretty well.
All right, great.
If I may ask one more question, quick. How do you measure the effectiveness of your solution?
We would probably test it in an AI to see if the biases are still there. For example, if looking at the data study, if there are biases such as gender and equating one gender to a specific term, such as male to doctor, female to nurse, and seeing if those implicit biases are still represented in our data study to see if representing the population actually changed the way that the population was being displayed in the specific study.
Okay, thanks.